Hi everyone, welcome to Passion Talk, an initiative by Times Passion Trails. It is an exclusively curated series of masterclasses where experts talk about their art, the inspiration, the stories, and their passion behind it. Our experts have specially crafted the subject for their masterclasses, sharing unique pearls of wisdom only they bring to the world. Today we talk about a prominent food columnist, author, gastronome, and food consultant. We are talking about late Jiggs Kalra, also known as the Czar of Indian cuisine and tastemaker to the nation. In a career that spanned 5 decades, Jiggs was instrumental in introducing Indian cuisine to the world and discovered unheard of regional culinary talents for Indian diners. He had numerous awards and accolades to his name. He has left an unmatched legacy. We are discussing Jiggs Kalra, his legacy, and his life with popular restaurateur, the brain behind critically acclaimed and trend-setting restaurants under the brand Massive Restaurants, and most importantly, a proud son, Zorawar Kalra. Welcome to Passion Talk, Zorawar Kalra.
Hi, Amin. Good to be here. And I must first and foremost congratulate you guys on this incredible initiative, Passion Talks. I think it's, at least in our industry, it's all about the passion. And it's great to see such innovation coming in from you guys. And I've been following this very, very incessantly. It's a great job there.
Thank you. Okay, Zorawar, take us through the passionate journey that led to the making of legend Jiggs Kalra. How did it start?
It's been such an incredible journey. And obviously, this past May 9th was a bittersweet day for me. It was my mom and dad's anniversary. And for the first time in my life, we missed one of that duo. And it was truly on that particular day, I sat back and started thinking on some of my best memories of my father. And, I think he was a very inspiring man. I think beyond passion, and he was perhaps the most passionate person you can ever imagine about Indian food. And he had this joie de vivre, he had this sense of responsibility towards Indian food, where he thought that we must make it reach the top of people's palates. We must make it global. We must, whenever somebody goes to any major city in the world, one of the top 3 dining destinations should be a restaurant with Indian cuisine. And he had a very uphill battle in the beginning. So I think what really defined the man was his crusade, almost his personal crusade to put Indian food on the global map. I think that's what really drove him day in and day out. That's why he worked tirelessly for over 30 years, collecting the best recipes. And he was not even a trained chef. That's the best thing. And yet he knew food better than most. In fact, nobody had as wide a plethora of knowledge of pan-Indian food as Jiggs Kalra that I know of. So overall, if I were to define him in 2 words, it would be inspirational and passionate. And that's why it makes complete sense to be on Passion Talks discussing him. But he was just incredible. The enthusiasm, the detailing, the love. It was like a childlike, fascination towards finding lost recipes, towards recreating, old dishes, towards documenting them. The big problem Indian food has always had is that we don't document our food. I mean, we have the greatest cuisine in the world. We have arguably the finest culinary traditions. We have the most sophisticated flavors. We have the most variety. And yet we never documented them. And what ended up actually happening was that we had great food, but it was being lost. So I think he took it upon himself, not just to put it on the global map, but also to document it and keep it for posterity. And I still remember him chugging away on his keyboard in the basement of our house. That's where we started our work. And he used to sit over there and literally work for hours. And very often with Dr. Pushpesh Pant, who was his co-writer on a lot of books. And these 2 guys, it was just so much fun just watching them do what they did. They were encyclopedias, and both liked each other's company so much, not just because they were working together, but because both of them, they could not find anybody else with the same level of enthusiasm or passion towards Indian food as each other. So, they really, they bounced off each other rather. They reflected off each other's glory, and they really did an outstanding job of doing what they did with Indian food. So I think my memories of him are forever going to be cherished by me. And, it's going to be his birthday on the 21st of May. So it's only 6 days away. And we will try and celebrate it the best way we can. That is by, celebrating his life by eating some great food that day. And also distributing it to some people outside, because he believed in doing that.
How did it start? This fascination, this inspiration to document Indian food. Did he ever share any of that, the moment that what led to all this?
See, I was born in 77, and I remember, I think Prashad came out in 83 or 84. I'm not clear. And as we all know, Prashad is now considered, the de facto standard. It is the book that is prescribed as course material to catering colleges and schools across the country. And in my opinion, it's still the best collection and the most accurate documentation of Indian food that I've seen. So obviously I'm biased. It's my father's book and it's a bestseller. But apart from that, I generally think it's a great book. And that came out, I think, in 83, 84. And he obviously had been working on it for a few years before he actually published the book. So I think his passion was probably even before I was born. I mean, he was the first syndicated column writer on food. I think it was for the Illustrated Weekly. And Khushwant Singh Ji gave him the opportunity to write India's first food column. I think it burgeoned from there. He was always a foodie, always an innovative man. He was doing crazy modern stuff as far back as the early 90s, where nobody else knew what modern food is. So, and obviously, but he was basically a traditionalist. So most of his food is all about tradition and ensuring authenticity. But also he was dabbling, like the salmon tikka, which is his creation, is now become one of the most famous kebabs in the modern day age. And there were so many other things also that he used, that he concocted over the years. But definitely the salmon tikka stands out. And I think the passion was there since forever. He finally got the opportunity, and with the success of Prashad, he found his voice. And through that voice, he was able to truly do what he was passionate about, which is to promote Indian food, to rekindle an enthusiasm amongst Indians, amongst his own people about their own food. And it was losing its sheen. Indian food till recently, although we love it the most, we don't think it fancy enough. But I think he was one of the people that made it fancy. I think that's another big credit that should go to him.
Yes, definitely put Indian food not just on international map, but on our plates as well, on our tables as well, as we proudly started speaking of Indian food. He had a knack of discovering regional Indian culinary talents. Take us through that journey. Some of the people he discovered are today, names that are everywhere.
He was deeply, like I said, deeply passionate about finding these lost recipes, finding these lost gems of Indian food. And he used to travel the length and breadth of the country. I remember my first visit, and one of the most famous things that he, in fact, brought a renaissance about was the galauti kebab. I mean, now it's probably one of the most popular food items in India. But let me tell you, had it not been for Jiggs Kalra, the only way we could have eaten galauti kebab was by going to Aminabad in Lucknow. He made it popular. He put it on some of the best menus in the five-star hotels. He did food festivals around this and various other kebabs. But this is the one that is my personal favorite kebab, so I'm mentioning it more. But like this, he found a lot of other gems and the gems that created them. So he found the gem itself, but also he found the jeweler who created the gem, right? Which is the chef or the master cook that was working on these dishes and these recipes. So I think the journey was incredible. He had a penchant for finding these talented people who were literally in the nooks, who lived in nooks and crannies of small bylanes of cities, and they were not known, but they had this talent. And he really wanted to bring them to the forefront. And I think that ethos goes right down to his first book, which is Prashad. The subtitle, the byline of the book is Cooking with Indian Masters. He never said, these are my recipes. He gave credit to the chefs. He gave credit to the people with whom he worked to build those recipes. And that's the continuing point throughout his career. That's why his collaboration with Mr. Pushpesh Pant also. It's good to give credit where it's due. And that's what Jiggs Kalra was really, really good at. He was not selfish. He was not hungry or greedy for fame. He took the help of a lot of people and gave them due credit, put them at the forefront. So, Usman Mia, who's now the current owner of the Tunde Kebab brand, became world famous. My dad took him all over the world for festivals and stuff. Never claimed to have invented anything himself, except for the things that he did. He invented a lot of stuff. But that he didn't invent, he would put the chef at the forefront. So I think he always enjoyed this. I traveled with him. I remember going to Tunde Mia for the first time in Aminabad.
You've highlighted two very important things. Galati kebab and tunde kebab. Which, according to you, Zorawar, four or five such talents that immediately come to your mind that we can safely and proudly say that Mr. Jiggs Kalra put them on the world map?
No, so I would not say. Firstly, tunde kebab and galati kebab is the same thing. Tunde Mia was the guy who made the galati kebab, so that's the same thing. They're the same product. They're just called by two different names. There are so many other great chefs. In terms of products, there are multiple. I mean, just from Lucknow itself, pan ki gilori, santre ki barfi, Ram Babu ke parathe from Agra, Dora kebab. The kakuri was already popular, so that he didn't have much role to play there. There are so many things and great chefs like Imtiaz Qureshi, that was working very closely with him, and he's featured in the first book. Chef Arvind Saraswat, one of the greatest chefs of all time. So many people he has worked with, so many dishes he's made. But I think more than just chefs, I think he literally got India's focus back onto Indian food. He did not like it when people were moving towards all these other cuisines, which they had little knowledge about, but were just because they were fashionable, people were going to these Italian restaurants without knowing what they're eating. I mean, if you're going to put half a jar of red chili in your pasta arrabbiata and you're calling it a pasta, then you're mistaken. I mean, it has to be made in a certain way. It has to be made with certain, Italian-style DOP certified tomatoes. It has to be al dente. Everything in India is overcooked. So he used to, and he had a special fetish for not overcooking, his food. I mean, I remember the first time I had al dente pasta, and I actually told him I was a kid. I was maybe 10 years old, and I told him, Dad, this pasta is kacha, and he started literally laughing at me, and he told me, son, it's not kacha. That's the way it's supposed to be made. It is al dente, and it has to be it has to have a bite and texture. So I think he worked with so many different people. He worked with so many different cuisine aspects of Indian food, that it became truly, I can't really select those top five, but I did mention a few. But I think it was pan India. He mentioned a restaurant to me, I still remember, called Venu's Military I think it was in Kerala. Venu's Military, and he told me it's probably the best restaurant he's ever had, and it's the cheapest non-veg meal he's ever had. I think it was 50 rupees or 40 rupees for a full thali, unlimited thali of non-vegetarian food coming again and again. So like that, a lot of restaurant gems, a lot of chefs, and a lot of dishes themselves are what he focused on and created this repertoire.
Okay. And you went on food tours with him? Took any food journeys with him?
Lots of food journeys. Like I said, across India all the time. I remember going to Agra. First time I had Ram Babu ke parathe, I was blown away. That tawa, that tawa on which they make that paratha weighs 40 kgs. You can't pick it up that easily. It's a full slab of metal, and the amount of ghee that goes into it. I learned that. I saw the man making pan ki gilori, balai ke pan. Imagine that art and skill required to make a gilori out of malai. He was literally putting malai on a very high heat pan, and the deftness of the hand that he would quickly curl it up and remove, because otherwise it would get burnt in a second, right? It's such a thin layer of malai. And then these are the things that I remember the most. But I think the one trip that I remember the most going with him, which was a culinary trip that we did in, I think it was 1993. Yes, it was 1993. I just passed my 12th boards. We were waiting for our results. It was summer, and we all flew down to Scotland and Wales, and we did a bed and breakfast tour in a car. We drove along the coast. We drove along the seaside, and we went and stayed at about 6 or 7 bed and breakfasts. And Dad was writing as a journalist, he was covering these bed and breakfasts. And it was such a surreal experience. Firstly, the entire scenery was outstanding, it was beautiful. But just that experience of staying at these wonderful small hotels that were called bed and breakfasts, run by little families that lived there and worked there, and was their business as well as their home. And the food, I mean, farm to fork is something we've started talking about now. I had it in 1993 when all the vegetables, all the meats, everything was literally grown in the farm back behind the house, and they would pick that up every morning and make a fresh dish. It was farm to fork in the true sense of the word. So that culinary tour was truly exemplary. I mean, how old was I? I was 16 years old. My brother was 14. And it was my mother, my father, and the two of us. And what I remember the most is this small little bed and breakfast called Penally Abbey. and I think it was in Wales, and we stayed there for one night. I think all these bed and breakfasts we spent one night, but we spent the whole day there the next day, and it was truly a surreal experience because the food was great, but the whole place was so beautiful. Our room was very quaint. It reminded me of when I saw this movie later, The Hobbit. It kind of the cottage reminded me of the Hobbit cottages in where these guys used to live. So in fact, I mean, I think that particular trip to Scotland and Wales in 1993 is perhaps most harbored the development of this passion within me to follow to get into the restaurant line. And I think that's what my father did his whole life. He always instilled into me that I should follow my passions. He never forced me into anything. He didn't have a business. Please understand, he was a professional. He was a ideas millionaire. He used to come up with great ideas, but he would do it for other people. All the great brands that he's worked on, Bukhara, Dampukht, Singh Sahab, so such great brands he's worked on. None of them he owned. He did them as a consultant for various hotels. Great Kebab Factory, Bukhara, Dampukht. He's worked on all of these, and he's done extensive work with so many other hotels. And he's really forged some very strong relationships with a lot of people during the course of his career. But with me, he was always very careful to never pressure me to do anything. He always said, "Follow your passion." In fact, once I told him, "Dad, I really enjoy going out to the ocean, to see to see the sea, to study marine life." And he told me, and I think I was in my teens, he said, "Why don't you become a marine biologist? I think it's the best job in the world." That's what he told me. So he gave me a full, he gave me complete freedom in deciding what I wanted to do. It was just that seeing what he did with so much passion, I really got enthralled by it all. And I think that's where he really came in and deciding where, without even pushing me towards it, he kind of did steer me towards entering into the food business.
And when you decided that food business was your calling, obviously inspired by Mr. Jiggs Kalra, were you under pressure because of the brands that he was associated with, he helped set up, and then you are going ahead and setting up something of your own? And what kind of influences did you completely outrightly borrow from Mr. Jiggs Kalra?
Well, there's always pressure. But you have to figure out if you want to be bogged down by the pressure, or do you want to use that pressure as a tool to fuel yourself, as a positive thing. Is there pressure to uphold the legacy of your father who's worked his whole life towards something and is now on a wheelchair? Because when I got into the restaurant industry, he was on a wheelchair. He had a stroke in 2000, which left him paralyzed on his left side. And for 19 years, he was on a wheelchair and still traveled the world, went to all my restaurants. So he was still on a wheelchair. So there was a huge burden of responsibility on me. But I never took it in a negative way. I took it as a source of fuel, to fuel my own passions, to fuel my own urges. And I wanted to make him proud. So definitely there was initially a pressure, but I think there was a bigger advantage. And I'll be lying if I say that having Jiggs Kalra's name attached to yours is anything but an advantage. It's a huge advantage, especially to get your foot in the door, to attract the first bunch of customers. Beyond a point, it's the quality of your product that talks. Beyond a point, no matter what name is on the door, if you're not doing a good job in your restaurant, customers are not going to come. So definitely the initial impetus was there. His name is incredible. It's a huge draw even today. And did it help me in the initial parts of my career? It helped me immensely. And I'm grateful to him for that and will forever be. But he was also a man that told me to always, build my own name, not follow in his shadow, not just be Jiggs Kalra's son. He always wanted to be known as Zorawar Kalra's father. And that, I think, again, gave me a lot of, freedom. It gave me a lot of, it was like a launch pad for me from a mental perspective, right? You're starting out your business, you have a lot of stress, and you got your father's name to uphold. But when he talks to you like that, and he says, "Listen, I'm very proud of you, whatever you're doing. I want you to prosper even further." So I think it gives you that little bit extra push. And that's what gave me that comfort in getting into the business and pushing things even further, and hopefully taking his name forward.
Take us through the journey of first restaurant under the supervision of Mr. Jiggs Kalra. He's watching you constantly all the time. He's looking forward to what you are going to create, and the pressures that you were under of creating something that had his name.
I still remember that day, in fact, very well. And it was June the 19th of 2008. The first restaurant I opened with his name was Punjab Grill by Jiggs Kalra. I don't own that company anymore. I've sold that brand now, but
Okay.
I remember that day like it was yesterday. And my dad was very well involved. In fact, the entire menu was entirely taken from his work. Even the names, the descriptions, everything was from his menus, his books, his food festivals. His entire body of work pertaining to Punjabi food was the core, was the inspiration behind the entire menu. So it was truly an exciting time. I think it was Saturday, June 19th, that we did the launch party. A lot of people came, very successful. People loved the food. It was fantastic. Next day was a Sunday. We gave off to the entire staff to relax and rest before Monday we opened for business. And those were the days, 2008, there was no internet. Well, there was internet, but there was no social media to speak of. We hadn't called any of the journalist friends to come and review the food.
Yes.
It was pure word of mouth that a restaurant had to rely on those in those days to get customers. And I remember Monday we opened for the first time. I think we opened only for dinner because we weren't ready for lunch. And we had some basic people walking in. Tuesday, being North India, people don't go out and eat non-veg and stuff, so people didn't come out much. Wednesday, suddenly, and I think it was the word of mouth spreading and the people's hunger for a Jiggs Kalra restaurant to open, that we started getting bombed. We started getting bombarded with customers walking in. And this was a new mall. This was Ambience Mall in Gurgaon. The mall was barely open. There were not too many places to eat. There was not too much crowd coming in. So most of the crowd coming to that mall in the weeks pursuing this was for Jiggs Kalra's restaurant. And I still remember Wednesday we started getting completely overcrowded. By the time Friday came, we had no napkins. We had run out of all napkins. We were only giving people paper tissues. We only had half the menu left. Most of the food was finished. Almost 30 to 40% of our customers on Friday night walked out without paying, not because they were cheating us, because we did not have the wherewithal or the standards or the manpower to be able to serve them their bills. So it was a truly overwhelming experience. And my father had come to join me for dinner that day, early evening, and I had to give him paper tissue, and he started laughing. He's a perfectionist. When I talk about a perfectionist, he's the epitome of a perfectionist. He used to, like, everything in his life had to be proper and as close to perfect as possible. And he knew that a perfectionist is just a misnomer. It's just a self, fulfilling. I mean, it's a cliche in a way. But he knew that perfection can never be attained. You just have to strive for it every single day, and that's what he taught me all the time. But despite being who he was, instead of getting angry with me that I'm spoiling his good name and I'm giving a paper tissue to a fine dining restaurant, he started laughing. He started guffawing. He used to laugh in a roaring manner. He used to roar with laughter, and he was a very, very positive guy. I still remember he told me, "Son, this is a sign of success that you run out of napkins on the 5th day of your opening." And he was very, very positive, encouraging. And from that day, everything just took off. Punjab Grill became a mega hit. And then we started massive restaurants. And then the second restaurant that I started with his name was Masala Library. And I still remember that very well as well. It was in 2014.
Yes.
And obviously, we all know now that it's become an institution. But at that time, I was playing around with his food, and it still said Masala Library by Jiggs Kalra. I've only opened 2 restaurants with his name. Initial was Punjab Grill, which no longer has his name. And we don't own that anymore. And the second, of course, is Masala Library, which is our brand, which is our flagship brand, and it uses the Jiggs Kalra name. And I remember that particular opening as well. And he was very finicky about my using his recipes as a base and then modernizing them. But once I made him do a trial, everything changed in his mind. He said, "Son, this is the right way to go." He actually encouraged me to do even more with modern food, using his recipes. He said, "Never lose respect for the host dish when you try and modernize. Always make sure that when you're modernizing, the core essence of that dish remains, the true flavors remain, and you don't lose ethos. The dish itself does not lose its ethos." So I think that's what he taught me, and he taught me to do it with restraint. So the all this modern molecular stuff that we had started in India for the first time, we did it with a lot of restraint. We never did it with gimmicks. We never did it with the sheer simplicity of using it as a theatrical element. We did it to genuinely enhance the flavors of the dish, to genuinely enhance the dining experience, and to create a sense of novelty and to innovate. So I think he was very encouraging in that as well. Despite him being out of his element, despite him not having much to do with modern food, he was a traditionalist, like I said earlier. He still encouraged me a lot with
Yes.
Masala Library. And so these are the two openings that I remember the most, because these were the restaurants that I had the most pressure in, because they both held his name at the door.
And Zorawar, from Punjab Grill 2000 to 2014 Masala Library, the journey that you went on, the journey that you undertook, the brands that you started, how much of those brands were a reflection of Jiggs Kalra?
In massive restaurants, I would say everything to do with Indian food is his inspiration. Whether it's Masala Library, whether it's Farzi Cafe, whether it's Made in Punjab. These are the three Indian brands that we have. And I can tell you that even in our other brands, such as our bar brands like Union, where there's a lot of Indian food involved, even there, the Indian aspect of things is entirely, entirely under his stewardship. We have the best person for knowledge and for a recipe database in the world with us. Why would we go anywhere else? So it was a big advantage.
Yes.
Using his incredible knowledge, using his incredible repertoire of recipes, his data bank, his mind, his innovation, his direction, everything was utilized in making all these brands, the Indian brands. And I think we always followed his main mantra, that focus on the ingredient, focus on the cooking process, and serve with a smile. As long as you do these three things, the food will come out right, and your restaurant will be successful. So his DNA is in everything that we do, in every single thing. Even in the non-Indian brands, such as Papaya or Bowtie, or we have quite a few other brands. Even there, the ethos that he built into us, that sense of focus on the food, the sense of respect for the chef, all those various ingredients were always there in all our restaurants. And I think they kind of were the fundamental building blocks for all of our brands. So it's not just the Indian ones. His culture, in a way to speak, or his DNA was deeply ingrained into all of our brands, is deeply ingrained in all of our brands.
We've all seen how lockdowns have told us that in order to stay in and stay sane, you need that kind of a passion. Take us through a scenario where Zorawar and late Jiggs Kalra Saab were locked in and were brainstorming and coming up with new things. Take us through those moments where he literally made sure that you followed your passion, then end up becoming, say, for example, a marine engineer.
Well, luckily there was no lockdown when he was alive. He would have not liked this lockdown. I'm telling you very clearly. He would be pushing me to take him out all the time if he was alive today. But there was no time that we were locked down, but there were definitely times where we were self-locking ourselves down to get some work done. For example, I remember we had gone with the late Vajpayee ji, the Prime Minister of India, he was at that time, to Malaysia to do his official state meal. So he was called over there, and as part of his entourage, as part of the people who were going to do the state banquet that he was going to host for the Malaysian authorities, we were there as well. And I remember the menu, and we had a lot of debate. So we were locked into the hotel room. That's the one lockdown with Dad that I remember. And literally one whole day before that dinner was actually done, we were just constantly running over all the details. We wanted it to be perfect. It was a matter of great honor to represent your country on an international stage. So I remember a lot of back and forth going on at that time, a lot of ideas exchanging, some heated arguments and conversations. But overall, I have, he was he was proud of my involvement in things. He wanted to encourage me. And at that time, there was no brands that I owned. I had just come back from the US. I had no running business. I had nothing for him to be really proud of. I had achieved nothing. And yet, how he encouraged me showed that, he really wanted me to succeed. And I think being locked in with him in that hotel room, debating every small facet, every small detail of that banquet, every ingredient, what dish to put, what dish to serve at what time, what are the course by course layout, all of that stuff was so, it was a fun time. It was a real fun time. Even though there were pressures, there were huge pressures. There was, there was a time pressure. You had to make sure the food is super hygienic, super safe. You have to make sure that, everything is done in a timely manner, that you're putting your best foot forward, that you're representing your country in the most amicable way possible. All these pressures were there. But what I remember the most is not even the meal and not even the great conversation that Mr. Bajpayee and Dad had after the meal. And Dad was on a wheelchair at that time, remember? So I don't even remember any of that. But what I do remember the most is the debate going on for almost not 24 hours full, but the day before in the hotel room, making sure that everything was absolutely spot on. So I think we have been locked down once, and that's the way it panned out, and it was a good, fun experience. But I'm sure he would not have liked today's lockdown. He would have been pestering me to take him out every single day. And I'm telling you, I'm his son, and I would have obeyed. I would have obeyed him. If he wanted to take me out, I would have risked, and I would have taken him out for a drive in the car.
Was he a good cook himself? Did he cook a lot?
As we all know that he was not a cook, he was a journalist, but he knew food better than most, especially Indian food. He never used to cook too much at home. But I'll tell you one thing, boss. There's nobody in the world that could make a better omelette than my father. Very often, he used to travel a lot when we were growing up. So we were always itching, and we couldn't wait to see him. He used to travel a lot. He was, in fact, one of the most frequent flyers in India before he had a stroke in 2000. And we used to crave him. We used to crave meeting him. We used to crave spending time with him, me and my brother. And we were a joint family at that time. So I even had my cousins who were living on another floor above us. And so we all lived in the same house. It was a great fun time. We had a great upbringing. And on certain Sundays, when he was in the mood, he would wake up and he used to make these omelets for us. And I'm telling you, I mean, abhi bhi mere muh mein pani aa raha hai. They were just fantastic. He used to get oregano. I'm talking about late 80s. There was no oregano in India. He used to actually get oregano, fresh oregano, hand crush it, put it on the omelets, and that taste of that oregano, that cheese oozing out, and sometimes he would put some meats, or sometimes he would put some, onions. He used to make these miraculous omelets that were so, for the lack of, they were luxurious. I can't think of a better word to describe those omelets than being pure luxurious. And at that time there was all this thing about, oh, don't give too much cheese to the kids, they'll become overweight, all that. He said, I don't care. If I'm going to make an omelet for them, I'm going to make the best omelet I can. Put some nice meats in there. He used to get some imported cold cuts. He used to get some really nice cheeses, these fresh herbs that he would hand crush and put in there. And I just can't get over. So that's the one thing he used to cook for us. He didn't used to cook too much else, but he was really good at making that omelet. And so he was very good at exposing our palate to things that he knew kids would not like initially, but he was very clever at doing that. So I still remember the first time we had caviar. He literally took a really crispy toast, put some caviar on top, put some eggs and parsley on top, and he gave it to us. Now, initial reaction was, oh my God, what the hell is a salty crab? Had he told us they were fish eggs, we would never have touched them, right? He kind of camouflaged the caviar under a whole bunch of other stuff. And we had 2, then we had 3, and suddenly we developed a taste for it. That's how caviar works. And me and my brother started loving it. But the one thing I still remember he was most clever at in exposing our palates to was anchovies. And anchovies are a very acquired taste. Either you love it or you hate it. They are briny, they are fishy, they are too salty. So what he did was he took a big block of cream cheese, and he literally put the anchovies in it, and he made a spread. So it was an anchovies and cream cheese spread where there was more cream cheese, less anchovies to kind of bring us into it. And it was just extraordinary. I mean, we put it on a crispy toast, and he used to get his own breads, by the way. But Dad used to get breads, baguettes, full baguettes, and he had an electric cutting knife. And he used to and he used to enjoy this. This was like stress-free for him. He used to take these big loaves of bread, take his amazing electric bread cutter that he used only for the bread, and only he knew how to use it, and nobody else was allowed to touch it. And he used to make these wonderful slices himself, and we used to toast them up and put this spread on it and various other things over the years. But I still remember that that's the first day that he kind of duped us into trying anchovies, and it was a great experience. And I think me and my brother became addicted to that spread, and we used to have it all the time. So he was very good at exposing our palate to things. Didn't cook much at home, but he was definitely an epic guy at making omelets.
Zorawar, a lot has been spoken about Jiggs Kalra's writings, his passion for discovering new things. His journey is well documented and celebrated till the time he had that stroke. Do take us through the journey as to how this man who was constantly up and about, moving around, then this sad incident of stroke happened in his life. How did that change him, and how did he take that in his stride and yet continue to pursue his passion?
Yeah, I still remember that day. I mean, I was in India. I had not gone to the US at that time. I left a year later, and it was November. I think it was November 3rd, 2000, and Dad was in his office downstairs. He was sitting with somebody doing some business work. Suddenly, this guy shouts out. The guy he was sitting with, he knew me. Kulmohan Singh, his name was. Call out to me, Zorawar, come down. Something is wrong. I came down. My dad was slurring and he was looking confused. I didn't know what a stroke was. I was a 23-year-old guy, and I had no clue what a stroke is. I had no clue about pretty much anything.
Yeah.
I was just a sheltered kid till that time, was about to go to the US for studies. Everything fell apart. I still remember the sheer fear. The fear made me, it's like a deer being caught in the headlights. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't think. And immediately we obviously rushed into the hospital.
Yeah.
Again, didn't know what a stroke was. The next day, and the next week, in fact, after that, our only goal was to make sure that he stays alive. We already knew by that time, the doctors had told us that, he's going to have paralysis and he might not be able to walk again in his life. At that time, that's very disheartening for a son to hear. But at that time, you don't care about any of that. You just want your father to live. And I still remember that harrowing experience. I didn't eat for 3 days. I didn't sleep more than 2 hours at a time. It was pure hell on earth because my entire sense of security vanished in one split second. But more importantly, it's about your father. I mean, now you have to rise up. You have to take responsibility. You have to ensure that your father is somehow gets out of this alive. And he was one of the most frequent travelers in India pre the stroke. He had, he was on a plane every week. He used to, not in India, but he used to be in Delhi in his house, not more than, I would say, 10 to 12 days in a month. Constantly traveling. From that to complete standstill, to never being able to drive a car again, to never be able to tie his own turban again. I think it was very difficult for him. It was very difficult for us, but I can tell you, he's a tough guy. He never showed it, but I'm telling you, it was very hard for him. And sometimes I've seen him break down. Not very often. Very tough man. Never used to show his emotions too much. Never used to. He was a tough man, so he couldn't show weakness in front of his children. But I did see him break down a few times. Mostly because when he realized that he can never tie his turban again himself, and it was heart wrenching. The years after that, it just showed what kind of a champion mentality he had, what kind of joie de vivre he had. He wanted to live. The doctors told us, that a person with this big an infarct in the brain, this big a stroke, is probably not going to live for more than 5, 6, 7 years max. My dad lived for 19 years. It was a combination of his will to live, his will to survive, and obviously good medical care. It has to be both. It can't be just one. But his will to survive is what doctors told us, is that he was 1 in a million, or maybe even more than that, would have lived for 19 years after such a huge, debilitating stroke. So every day he lived, he wanted to enjoy great food. He wanted to enjoy his grandchildren. Since the day my grandchildren were born, he became even better. He wanted to live even more. And it's that really inspires me the most about him. From being the man who perhaps was the biggest mover and shaker, travels the world. He had been to over 50 countries. His passport was, I think 6, 7 of them joined together. It was this thick. He used to take this whole book with him. Such a well-traveled man, completely being on bed. But obviously, even after his being on a wheelchair, I did take him all over. He went to all our launches across the country. He went to a lot of international visits as well. So his willingness to live, his willingness to still, seize every day. The carpe diem, right? Seize the day. His willingness to seize the day existed in him till the very end. And I think it's difficult from an outsider's perspective like me, but what he was going through, what he was perhaps going through was tough, but he never showed it, and he wanted to live till the very day that he died. Even that day, I remember. I know that day is very emotionally gut-wrenching for me, so I won't go into that day, but till that day, he really wanted to live, and he was an inspiration. He was a champion. His mindset was of a winner. He did not accept defeat. He never could be the victim. He never could be the person that, that people feel sorry for. He didn't want to be felt sorry for. He wanted to be the man that people looked up to. I think that's a champion's mentality if there ever was one.
Remarkable. And his involvement with food when he had suffered that stroke, how did he keep himself involved with food, with various food-related activities?
He was superb at it. That's a very good question. I mean, you're really, you're asking all the right questions because they are so pertinent to, figuring out life before and after. There was somebody from my company, IT guy, always by his bedside. He couldn't type. His eyesight was not very good because of the stroke. He used to dictate concepts till the very end. He had great concepts. He used to come up with concepts till as far back as, maybe a few months before he went to the hospital for the final time. The guy used to keep coming up with the recipes. He still wanted to do food festivals. He used to call himself the Phoenix. He said, I'm going to rise up from the ashes like a phoenix does. He still wanted to do stuff. He was not just happy that his son is doing well now. He said, okay, that's you. What about me? What am I going to do? That's the champion that he was. That's the kind of man that he was. And till the very end, closely involved with food, always a guy next to him writing down his recipes, writing down his ideas, writing down his concepts. He always wanted to, he used to be on the phone every day. He used to call his friends, and he was a journalist, right? For a large part of his life, he was a journalist. So every day he would call up some journalist friend or the other, talk to them. Sometimes those conversations became dark when he was in a bad, depressed mood. Most of the times the conversations were positive. But overall, he was constantly engaged. See, he's one of those men that his brain needed to be occupied for him to remain sane. If his brain was not occupied, he would go crazy. So he would keep himself occupied. And we gave him the, full freedom. Dad, do this, Dad, do that. He used to go to my restaurants, I would say minimum once in 2 days. He would sometimes go to my restaurants every day, and he used to love trying the food. He used to go to my restaurants all the time. His favorite was Made in Punjab because it was close by. He used to love going to Masala Library, but it was in Delhi, so it was too far for him to go. But he used to love papaya actually a lot. He used to eat a lot at papaya. I remember every Sunday brunch for several months in a row, we were at papaya as a family having our meals over there. So he was constantly involved with food. And from conceptualizing it to truly enjoying it. So I think it was a great time for him.
And Zorawar, I would like to ask you, as an expert and a perfectionist, a concept that you were extremely proud of and he said, this does not appeal to me.
Initially, he said that about Masala Library. Before trying it, before he knew what the food was. And before I told him that, Dad, in fact, I could not put his name on the door without him giving me an okay. I mean, till the very end, he was in charge. He was a man that was in charge of his name. I could not just use his name and put it there. I had to seek his formal permission. When I told him about the concept, he initially did not like the idea. He thought he was all about authenticity his whole life. He was about innovation. He did some stuff, but he was mainly about authenticity and upholding the ethos of Indian cuisine. He wanted no dilution to happen to his beloved Indian food. So when I told him I'm opening this pan-Indian restaurant, which is going to have your recipes as the base, but we're going to modernize them, we're going to do some new things, we're going to incorporate some new techniques, technologies, we're going to use this molecular gastronomy buzzword. At that time, it was very new to India. In fact, we were the only ones doing it. He said, I don't know what you're talking about. And he was not in favor of it. But then I took him for a trial, the first trial in Bombay. And he was blown away. He loved it. He loved the food, and he gave me his okay. He gave me his blessings. He gave me his huge 2 thumbs up. He said, "Go ahead. This restaurant will do very well." And I think that moment when he said that to me was the moment I knew in my heart that this is going to be a success. A big weight was lifted off my shoulders. I felt that I'm going to get into this with even greater enthusiasm, and I got deeply motivated. So that one statement from him was enough to push me over the moon. I was literally over the moon, and I got this, this push you get from behind, this sense of that this is going to work. That feeling you get, that gut instinct became even stronger. My gut instinct was always strong about the concept, but with his saying that, it gave me that external validation that was required for me to go out and pursue this concept with even greater gusto.
His blessings and of course your concept combined together have made it one of the marquee Indian restaurants. Zorawar, thank you so much. It has been an absolutely inspirational talk, reliving the legacy and life of a legend, a true legend, Jiggs Kalra, who put Indian cuisine not just on global map, but on our tables as well. Thank you so much for joining in. I mean, that exactly is the idea of Passion Talk, where we relive the life and the story and inspiration behind such a legendary act.
Thank you very much. Pleasure being on this incredible new initiative by the Times Group. And, it was good. Through this, I was able to rekindle some of my old memories. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Zorawar. As you saw, our Passion Talk is all about reliving the lives of people who've really made a difference, what inspired them, the stories behind it. Thank you so much for watching this edition of Passion Talk. Our series continues with many such amazing masterclasses lined up, with each having as exciting and interesting a personality as Zorawar, and talking about as inspiring a personality as Mr. Jiggs Kalra. Thank you so much. Keep watching.